Welcome to the American Med Spa Association podcast, Medical Spa Insider. This week, AmSpa founder Alex Thiersch is speaking with John Wheeler of Alpha Aesthetics Partners.
All right, everybody. Alex Thiersch here. This is Medical Spa Insider, the podcast of the American Med Spa Association, AmSpa. Welcome to the program. We have a very special guest, Mr. John Wheeler of Alpha Aesthetic Partners, which is a platform, I guess, is kind of the term, the corporate term that is acquiring medical spas and aesthetic practices across the country and rolling them into a platform where they, I believe, still maintain different in their own kind of unique brands. We'll talk about that, John, because I think what you've done is really cool. And so they've, I have to say, been a kind of a, I don't want to say you're not known, because I'm certain you're known, but you've been, I think, going about your business in a very kind of business-like, quiet fashion where you're starting to build a really cool, big, well-respected portfolio of med spas and aesthetic practices, and you've been doing it in a way that's, you're not necessarily out there thumping your chest at everybody, which I think is really cool. But I've watched you all from a distance, and it's really cool what you've built. So, John, welcome to the program. How you been?
I'm great, Alex. Thanks for having me. And yeah, glad to hear you say that. Glad you feel that way, man.
Yeah, no, it's cool. It's, honestly, like there's right now, there's so, well, I said for the past year, probably 2 years, there's so much activity in the M&A world, right? And it's just so much of this and of that. And it seems like everybody's talked to somebody and everyone's, on the phone trying to get a deal done. I think that's great, but what's cool is to talk to folks who have actually done it. And you've had a very active 2024, where you've acquired, I think, partnered with several practices. Tell me about, though, kind of what, first of all, what your platform is like, for lack of a better word, how this all came up, and kind of what your position is and value prop in the industry why people should pay attention.
Yeah. That's a great question. Alpha's kind of a different thing than a lot of the other platforms that you see. And a big part of that is, aesthetics is home for me. So before we started Alpha, we had Aesthetic Center, which was a family business. Before Aesthetic Center, I was actually a pastor for 7 years. And
I saw that too.
That was kind of an interesting juxtaposition from pastoral ministry to aesthetics, but actually there's a lot of us. It's kind of interesting. But I got started in aesthetics. Actually, that's kind of a funny story that we've never talked about, but
really, because I was absolutely going to ask you about that. So this is not being teed up, but I saw that you had a background in theology and you were a pastor. How that translates into aesthetics, there's got to be a story.
Yeah, well, I was a pastor and I started a wedding DJ company, fell in love with business, didn't want to do vocational ministry anymore. And I sold the wedding business, moved back home in 2017. And that's when my father-in-law, who's a facial plastic surgeon, he had a practice for about 25 years in a small town called Placerville. And he called me up. He said, "Hey, I want to start a new practice in El Dorado Hills, California. I would love for you to do the marketing at this med spa." And I'm like, great. Because I was kind of in between, figuring out what I was going to do next. I was like, great. What's a med spa? I had no idea. And he was like, "Well, we just went to this conference in Vegas called AmSpa, and they're having," and I've never told you this, they're having a boot camp in September in San Jose. And so this was September of 2017, maybe somewhere around like September 5th or 15th, somewhere in there of 2017, 7 years ago. And so I went. He sent me there, and you were presenting, and obviously it was your event, and Tim Sawyer and a lot of other folks. I literally didn't know anything. I knew nothing about aesthetics. And I also met somebody there named Dory, who was an early influence for me, and just launched me into aesthetics. And then July 2nd of 2018, we launched our med spa, hard launched it in El Dorado Hills. And we quickly, in about 4 years, grew it from 1 location to 3 locations, about 30 providers, $15 million in revenue. And I just fell in love with aesthetics. Absolutely fell in love with it. I was able to start parlaying my background as a pastor and a preacher with what we were doing, 0 to 15 million in 4 years, doing some things that we felt like were innovative or cutting edge at the time. And I still do. feel that way, and just was able to speak around the country and got to meet a lot of founders of the industry, and started to notice that a lot of these big box med spas were really starting to decimate some of the local med spas. And so for me, that was personal. I took that personally because, again, this was home. I'd fallen in love with the industry, and I hated all of the poaching and the recruiting away that these local businesses really couldn't compete with. It was kind of like Walmart versus Main Street, back in the day.
And yeah, it's interesting because I haven't heard. I know that's happening. I haven't heard too much about it. What did that look like in practice? Like when you say that they're starting to have these big box, these bigger brands were starting to impact. What did that look like to you, and what was happening to some of these med spas?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was just under the guise of training, where it's like, hey, this big box med spa, through one of these brands, an injectable brand, sent in a trainer. They trained my people. 4 days later, all of my providers got a text that this brand was opening down the road, and they literally recruited 3 of my 4 injectors, and I couldn't compete. And as a capitalist, I understand that. Like, that's a win for the providers. But to me, it was like, well, through the free market, how do we provide an opportunity for the local med spas to be able to compete? And so that's when we created Alpha. That was a big reason. Again, as an industry insider, father-in-law, facial plastic. Like I said, my wife had been the lead injector at Aesthetic Center for many years. My mother-in-law worked in the business. My sister-in-law worked in the business. Like, literally, Thanksgiving dinner for us, we're talking about laser physics. We're talking about rheology. It's just not something I was like, oh, aesthetics is hot, I'm going to start doing that. It's like, no, this is family. This is our world. So we were able to launch Alpha, and we were the only platform I've ever heard of offering our providers shares, equity in Alpha at scale. A lot of opportunities for providers, a lot of training opportunities, a lot of really cool things that we're doing, again, with an intimate knowledge of providers and what it feels like to be a med spa owner. I think that's a difference as well. If you've never owned a med spa, like literally 4 years ago, I was managing one clinic, and we didn't have a lot of patients maybe in the afternoon, and I would work the reception desk for 3 or 4 hours so that our receptionist could go home and get any errands done, or just go home a little early. Like that's the level of experience we bring from the top down as CEO to Alpha. Yeah. So I also just think there's a little different level of understanding that we bring.
That's awesome. Do you ever do you still do any preacher activities on the side, or is that pretty much your like kind of a former life?
I do quite a bit of weddings. I'll officiate a few weddings every summer. But as far as public speaking in a church setting, I haven't done that in a handful of years. Not that I'm opposed to it, but just haven't had the opportunity.
It's interesting. You don't normally see that. So I think that's pretty cool. Yeah. So, I mean, and I don't want to assume this, but you grew, the original med spa that was, your family owned, was that ultimately acquired, and that's kind of what formed the basis of this platform, which is how we often see it. Like, somebody will grow it up, and then they'll find an owner, a provider like yourself, who seems to get it, and they're the ones who kind of bring it and take over the platform. And don't answer if you don't want to, but I'm curious if that's how the process went, and then you've kind of built that into, okay, now we're going to lead Alpha Aesthetics by, because you're a great example of what you can do, right? If you are a med spa owner and you work hard and you do what's right, that's a great example of that. And I think it's really, really important, and it's cool that you are now then leading that group, as opposed to what I've seen in some practices where they bring in, an operator who wants to, do everything, change this and that. So what was the process there?
Yeah, no, that's another great question. I'm an open book, man. There's nothing you can't ask me. So yeah, honestly, Alex, I had never heard of private equity like 2.5 years ago. So the beginning of 2022, I thought, hey, we're growing this thing. The slam dunk home run option for us would be if one day Massage Envy or European Wax Center wanted to get into med spa, maybe we could build a brand where they would be like, hey, this would be a great partner for us. I had truly never heard of private equity. And then the beginning of 2022, started to hear more and more about the involvement or the desire for a lot of the investment community to enter into our space. and met with a ton of different private equity firms, and even a lot of different other platforms that had already started, and felt really strongly, again, because of the thumbprint I wanted to have on our industry, because of just the way I like to lead and build culture. I really wanted to be the CEO of a platform. And so again, met with a lot of different firms. That was a possibility with several, but the Thurston Group, we did partner with them. We closed on our partnership March of 2023. And so, yeah, that's how it happened. Partner with them, and they asked me to be the CEO, and the rest is history.
Now, were you the first? Were you their first foray into medical spas, or did they have other assets at that point as well?
Yeah, Thurston has been very active in the dental space. They've been very active in the behavioral health space, medical weight loss. But this is their first medical spa investment.
That's
and
awesome.
So that's been a fun thing too, because we've gotten to innovate, and we've gotten to just have a lot of great exploratory conversations.
That's cool. And so, how many have you acquired so far? Like, what's your what number are you lying at right now?
Yeah, right now we have 20 locations throughout the U.S.
Awesome.
Handful of states. We're closing our next partnership at the time of this recording in just a few days here, and we're trying to do it the right way, because it's so easy. This is the crazy thing about mergers and acquisitions, is that a platform can look like they're absolutely killing it from the outside looking in, right? Where it's like, man, they're buying everybody, they're moving so quickly, they must be absolutely crushing it.
Yep.
What you don't know is what multiples are they paying, right? How are they able to, because this is essentially, if you're joining a platform, this isn't an exit strategy. This is, hey, on my own, there's a market on what my multiple is by myself. But when I combine under the umbrella of a platform together, when we're well integrated, we command a multiple at scale that's actually a fair amount higher than what I would get on my own.
Right.
So some of these platforms that you just see buying everybody, you don't know the multiple. Maybe they're not creating any value for, bite out of the apple 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it might be. You don't know how they're, like, what is their debt facility like? How much are they leveraging? So there's a lot that goes into it. And so for us, it's like, hey, we want to find great partners, because it's actually easier to unwind a marriage than it is a partnership. So we want to partner with the right people. We want to partner with people that aren't just really active on podiums, but also have a great business. We want to just have fun. Like, who are people that we're just in the trenches with? Because a good partner can make hard times good or fun. A bad partner can make great times terrible. And so it's just been a process of integrating people well, building a really great, fundamentally sound business, even if that means we're not moving at the absolute speed of light, but we're just trying to do it the right way.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. It's been I've been kind of tracking and following all the M&A activity. Private equity has been huge. And it's been interesting as we kind of move into, so going into 2025 now, you're starting to see some of these groups that have now acquired, and it's been a couple of years, right? It's been 2-3 years and more. And you're starting to see how some of the brands that they've acquired are, number one, are doing, and how they're feeling, and how the founders are feeling. And it's been a mixed bag, to be honest. I've heard some good stories, and I've heard some not so good stories where it's people haven't been very happy. But I think the thing that you're talking about that resonates with me, at least in the messaging, is that it has to be the right fit, and you have to be extremely transparent with the founders that you're talking to, as well as on behalf of the private equity company, because it's like this is a marriage, but worse, I should say, but better, right? It really is difficult to unwind if it doesn't work. And so, I mean, kudos to you for doing that. What's the kind of the reception been when you're talking to folks? I mean, has there generally been a fair amount of excitement? Are people skeptical about doing something like this? And how do you overcome that?
I think it's been interesting. Again, we've been active now for almost 2 years. So I think that, to your point earlier, there was this really big wave of just almost land grab pandemonium.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And then it kind of tapered off because, to your point, there was a lot of horror stories maybe from other platforms. It was like, hey, I have a friend that joined this company, it didn't go well, or they lied to them, right? Because it can be tempting in a mergers and acquisition environment to tell people what they want to hear. The truth is, though, I'm going to be 100% transparent with you. The truth is, like I said, joining a platform like Alpha or any other company, it's not an exit strategy. If it is, I would have questions about future equity events and if that platform will be able to monetize in the future unless they have an insanely robust recruiting arm. What it really is creating a company that is a brand of brands throughout the United States or throughout geographies that are almost as well integrated as a Laser Away or a Skin Spirit or an Ideal Image, right? Except for there's different brands, and because not every business has the same sign on their door, there can be more clinical autonomy, right? But operationally, we really need to drive toward as few EMRs as possible. We really need similar operating systems, right? This is the process of integrating. And so again, if a group's out there buying like crazy and they're just moving really fast, you don't know how well they're integrating. And then the third, maybe it's the fourth, but I think it's the third. The third aspect is, yes, creating happy partners. Creating happy partners that want to create more happy partners. And how do we do that? How do we preserve autonomy in the ways where it matters, like clinically, like culturally, and yet integrate in the way that we need to integrate to create a well-run, fundamentally sound business?
Yeah, was there ever, and I guess has there ever been a thought to try to kind of bring all the brands together under one umbrella brand? Because that's something that I've seen other folks do. Some have been successful at it, some not. But the idea that you're allowing these underlying portfolio companies that you're acquiring and their founders often to retain that brand identity, which is really important to some people. Other people, maybe it's not as important. But what was the decision making, matrix that went into that?
Yeah, well, I can touch on that first from just a broad stroke. So this is one thing I think is cool about private equity backed platforms is there are so many different strategies. So you see some of our peers, they'll consolidate every single mergers and acquisition deal into one brand. So you've seen Skin Spirit make some acquisitions. They've moved those into their brand. I even think that they renovate maybe the space a little bit. This is a perfectly fine strategy, by the way. With a lot of these strategies, there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. It's really personal preference. You've also seen other platforms like Chapter, which is backed by the Aspen Group. I believe they fold everybody into the same brand. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the case. Right. Yeah. And then there's others like that are kind of in between where we are, where it is very independent brands. There's others that are in between that I've seen where they'll combine. They took one brand from Utah, another brand I believe from Florida, totally different brands, and then they consolidated both of these distinct brands into one, and now they're tucking a lot of brands into that one brand. For us, when I think about it, as long as we can integrate, like I said, on the tech stack and operationally, I don't see a ton of value in combining the brand personally. And I can tell you why. So like I go to the dentist, you go to the dentist, we all go to the dentist, right? When I'm looking for a dentist, I'm not personally looking for like a really corporate feeling dentist. I'm just not. I'm kind of looking for the local dentist that maybe is a little bit more mom and pop. And if I went to a dentist and then all of a sudden they became this like really corporate feeling entity, for me as the patient, there would be a loss in goodwill, or maybe, right? Probably. And so
there would at least be some questions, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is this going to mean for me?
Yeah. What does it mean for me? Are they going to get like all corporate now? I mean, what's going to change? Is my dentist leaving? Is he retiring? Is this an exit strategy? Yeah. So for us, it's a strategy called shadow branding, where for the patient, we really don't want it to feel like much has changed. They shouldn't walk into any of our practices and say, this is an Alpha practice. Now, we want to be a part behind the scenes of leveling up the providers through great training and great resourcing and synergizing, right? In a few weeks, we're bringing all of our partners to Nashville. By the way, 20 of those are providers that didn't start the business, but they have equity in Alpha as providers. We call it, like I mentioned, it's our Alpha Shares program. So we bring people together, they synergize. We're going to do almost this speed dating round where it's like, okay, Alex and John, you guys talk. What's the best thing you did for 5 minutes? What's the best thing you did this year? What's the worst thing you did this year clinically or administratively, whatever, like just peppering you with questions. You guys talk. All right, now switch. So that's the type of opportunity we can provide. We really look at it like the best of both worlds, where you're still, in some ways, you have this mom and pop kind of, family, small town, local business feel, and yet you have the resources of a nationwide company. The other thing I love as an industry enthusiast is, I kind of touched on this earlier, Alpha provides for clinical autonomy. And what I mean by that is, if you work at McDonald's, you have to make a Big Mac the same way in Florida. It has to taste the same in Florida as it does in Alaska, as it does in Maine, as in San Diego, right? With a big box med spa, there's a lot of necessity to do that as well. That if you're going to go to chain A and you're going to get lip filler in Maine, it really should be a similar technique or a similar methodology as it would be at the same chain at a different location, though, same chain in San Diego, right? How do we optimize for uniformity, for cohesivity of technique? With us, though, we have amazing partners. Michelle, Sarah, Wasim, Ed Williams, Sheila Barbarino, Amanda. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, right? My father-in-law, Dr. Rice. So we would never, ever go to Sarah Safa, who I know is a friend of yours, and say, hey, Sarah, I know that you're one of the best injectors in the world, but we really need you and this new provider that we just hired 2 weeks ago to inject the exact same way. So now you're going to inject like this, whether you like it or not. We don't care about that, right? Because for the consumer, we want to drive uniformity across Sarah's brand clinically, but not necessarily across our Alpha portfolio. And so that's another thing that I think is really cool about what we're doing.
Yeah, I think it's, you could tell me more on this. I think it's probably appealing to a lot of folks, because that's part of the fear of coming into and getting acquired is in many ways you're worried that your identity and your ability to do what you want to do is going to be transformed into some corporate thing, right? And so I've heard that many times where it's like, what is this going to mean after I'm acquired? Am I going to now be a corporate robot? Is this all going to be the same? And so that's one thing I've always liked about allowing the brands to stay unique and to stay the same. I think that's an interesting, and it's a take that I think a lot of folks don't always affiliate with private equity. It seems to be like, they roll up and then they make it all the same. But then to have the ability to retain some autonomy when it comes to the clinical side is I think it must be alluring to some of the underlying folks that you talk to, because so I want to hear the answer to that. And then the follow-up to that is, what do you like, how does that work though moving forward as the brands continue is there going to be any type of uniform? Are you just going to let everyone have their own thing, or are you going to start trying to bring some, like, whether it's by virtue of like everyone's getting the same training, you're using the same products, like how's that going to work?
Yeah. Well, so when it comes to the same product, that's a really firm line in the sand for us, that we want our providers to inject with whatever products they feel like are going to give their patients the best outcome.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of this comes from the fact that my wife's an injector. My father-in-law is a facial plastic surgeon injector. I know firsthand, right? I ran a med spa at the local level. If I would have come to my injectors at any point when we had an aesthetic center, our 3 clinics, and just said, hey guys, we have the best margins with Galderma. So you guys are now only going to inject Galderma. That would have been the least popular idea I could think of. So why would we do that at scale? Because it's unethical. it flies in the face. Like, I think what a lot of companies don't understand is most of our team of providers, they're nurses. Well, why did nurses go to nursing school? Most of them, it's not because they thought they'd be in aesthetics. It's because they wanted to help people. So when they didn't go into sales, they didn't start selling copiers out of college. They went to nursing school to help. So why would we think they want to do, or they're wired to do anything other than that today, or that they want to make a decision based on profit margin and not based on outcome? It doesn't make sense to me. So again, when we think of consolidation, we're not talking about consolidating what people are injecting. No, though other companies might, I think. So what I don't want this to necessarily be an infomercial about Alpha.
Yeah.
I also want this to be like, anybody that's thinking about going down this road, how can we have just an open and honest conversation around consolidation, around mergers and acquisition? Some platforms absolutely say, hey, we're a MERS platform, or we're an Allergan platform. That's who we have the best pricing with. I think that's a worthwhile question to ask. Around training, we want to expose our people to training, right? We want to expose them to things that we think are going to give great outcomes, even training techniques that the companies can't train them on because they're off label. But then ultimately, we want the medical director of each of our partner locations to make that decision around how their team of injectors injects. And I think that's more than fair, right?
I think that's the right way to do it. It should be the way to do it. One thing you mentioned that I found really interesting, because you don't hear this often from, when you're talking about being acquired, was you said it's not an exit strategy, right? And I think that's an important point, because I've talked to a lot of folks, not just in this industry, but other industries, who have sold to private equity. And a lot of them, not all of them, but I've had a few who have said, in 3 to 5 years, they're like, man, if I had known it was going to be like this, I just would have sold everything and just gotten out when I did. But I think it's important to understand that that is not the point. You're not trying to exit and leave and be gone. Or if you are, then that needs to be disclosed right up front. But it's interesting that you put it that way, because that's something that I don't think people consider very often when they're thinking about that.
Yeah, when I think about what we're doing, what almost any platform that I know of is doing, there's really going to be an ask for, can we be arm in arm on this thing for 5 years? That's really the ask. I mean, ideally more, right? Our legal documents that we'll send out to each partner when they're under LOI, they'll say 5 years. I mean, if they were like, I want to do 10, we'd be like, amazing. That's great. We're paying a premium for your business because we like you, right? And so that's a big part of it. Now, if somebody says, hey, I want to be done in a year, we would tell them, hey, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. We're just not the company to partner with. And again, there might be platforms out there, I don't know of them, that are so good at recruiting that might be a strategy for them, where it's like, yeah, we'll partner with companies where the founder or the main injector wants to be done in 3-6 months. But like I said, we're so good at recruiting, we can backfill. But part of that is we're going to pay a really low multiple, because essentially the level of uncertainty when you're having to immediately replace the owner, the top producer, they're just GTFOing immediately. That's a lot of risk. That's a risky purchase. So I don't know of any companies right now that specialize in that or that are doing that.
Hey folks, it's Alex Thiersch. When it comes to injecting in the face, safety is more than skin deep. One wrong move could cause serious injury, hurt your reputation, and possibly endanger your business. That is why AmSpa partnered with the Academy for Injection Anatomy to create the AIA Advanced Cadaver Course, the most thorough and advanced facial anatomy course in the industry. Created and taught by renowned board-certified plastic surgeon Dr. Chris Surik, one of the foremost facial anatomists in the world, along with his hand-chosen faculty of the most experienced injectors in the industry. Students experience firsthand and close-up the anatomy of the face so that they can inject safely and confidently. Unlike other cadaver courses with large groups or limited access, the AIA Advanced Cadaver Course provides small group instruction with a high faculty-to-student ratio and a limit of 4 students per cadaver specimen. Everyone who attends gets a chance to inject real product and then dissect cross-sectionally to see how close they came to vessels and other important structures of the face. This hands-on cadaver lab follows a full day of instruction on facial anatomy from our world-renowned faculty, including discussions of complication management, rheology, and an introduction to the use of ultrasound in your practice by Dr. Steve Weiner, one of the pioneers of using ultrasound as facial injections. At this 2-day course, students learn how to avoid common danger zones, how dermal fillers behave, and the best places to place product for safe, outstanding results. More than 3,000 aesthetic injectors have improved the safety and efficacy of their injection techniques with the AIA Advanced Cadaver course. Now it's your turn. Visit americanmedspa.org/AIA Advanced. Start your journey to safer injecting today.
I don't either. But I feel like that is how some of the founders and the folks that are selling sometimes feel. Like this is kind of a way for me, to ultimately be exiting. And certainly there's part of that. But I think one of the best pieces of advice someone gave me once was, you have to understand that when you are, and I'm curious if this rings true for you, when you are selling your business, the minute it closes, and you're part of something larger, you have to be bought into that something larger as much as the private equity fund or the buyer is bought into your brand, because the minute that it closes, you no longer own that individual business yourself. It's owned by somebody else, and you're kind of working with them as opposed to working for yourself. And that's a very, very tough thing for some people to wrap their heads around, is like, it's no longer your business. So you're now working for a greater good that's not only your business, it's other businesses, right? And that's sometimes, I think, tough, especially in this business where people have built these things with their sweat, blood, and tears for years and years. And now all of a sudden you're part of something else, and it's not it's not your business anymore.
That right there is probably the hardest thing for partners of any platform. Is there's a loss of control, right? There can be a little bit of a loss of identity, or at least a shifting of identity. That it was just me, I was the boss, now I'm part of a whole. But yeah, I think that the best way to think about it really is, we want to partner. A lot of the platforms want to partner with people, especially Alpha though, people that want to build regional empires. So when you're transacting your business with Alpha, essentially what you're signing up for is to be a regional platform or a regional empire where you're saying, honestly, I might be going harder than I've ever gone before. And when we think about, Alex, I mean, what we really want to go after, what every private equity firm wants to go after, is in 3 to 5 years, we want to 3 to 5x the value of our equity, our partners' equity, our everybody that's a shareholder at the original level of Alpha. We want to 3 to 5x their equity. Now, how do you 3 to 5x your equity? Well, you do that through growth, right? So anytime someone's like, I don't want to grow, I'm done. It's like, well, you're not going to help us 3 to 5x our equity. So we probably can't partner, right? So really what you're signing up for is to run a region. That's what you're doing when you're transacting. How do I run a region? How do I, we just opened our first de novo 2 months ago now in San Diego. We have a handful more that are opening, right? It's how do we acquire what you have today? And then how do we build more de novos all around you, around your brand? How do we even maybe look for smaller med spas that we can tuck in under your brand with full transparency before we go under LOI with that person of like, hey, we like you. We love what you bring to the table. We think you'd be a great fit under this brand. So that's really what the strategy is.
Yeah. So I see, I see that you've learned the private equity M&A lingo. You speak the language now. How long does it take you to kind of get acquainted with that? Because you went from someone who said never heard of private equity before, right? Running something, to now you're the CEO of this brand that is acquiring, and you're doing a lot of these deals and you're talking the talk. What was that transition like?
Yeah, it was honestly, I try to be a sponge. I mean, how do you feel you're doing? Do you feel because you guys, we've done deals with you guys. We did our Bay Area deal with Bertadotto, at least. Right. I mean, how do you feel the learning curve is on your end in the lingo?
I mean, it's a little different for me because I get to, but I'm the same way. It's like I get to sit there and just kind of watch and soak it in. I'm not necessarily in the trenches doing the legal work and the legal documents on those things, but it's weird. Sometimes I feel like I know what I'm talking about, and other times I'll be like, I have no idea what I'm talking about. This is imposter syndrome times the 100, because it's just like, this is not so it comes and goes.
Yeah. I think for me, so I can recommend a few things. So I was never the leader, especially at Aesthetic Center, and I'm becoming more and more of it now. But at Aesthetic Center, I really wanted to optimize for culture. I really wanted to optimize for our people. I wanted to be, a company that was inspiring, and I just felt like revenue would follow, and it did. I wasn't the guy that was like in the financials all the time, and I don't have an MBA. So the adjustment from going from that place to where I am today, where, we have a company that does dozens and dozens and dozens of millions of revenue. And, I have a board that I report into, and I have a COO with 30 years of super high level COO experience. His last company was Love's Travel Stops, which is in the tens of billions of dollars of revenue. Our CFO, 9-year CFO, right? This is the team that I lead. So it has been a big adjustment, to be honest with you. And like I said, I try to be a sponge. There's a couple books I'd recommend. The first one is Financial Intelligence for Entrepreneurs. That was a really good primer for me on just what's the language of finance. Another really important relationship for me has been with Dan Davis. He's the chairman he's the managing partner of Thurston. He's on the board. Yep. And right before we closed with Alpha, I was like, Dan, I'm not Mr. Finance. And I know that I need to be, but I would really love to go get my MBA. And he was like, John, you're crazy. There's so many people that would kill to be the CEO of a Thurston-backed company. He just told me, I'll teach you everything you need to know. And I've just tried to absorb everything. He was and still is very gracious with me on just like, man, Alex, I'd never looked at a capital plan. I had not ever looked at a cash flow forecast when we had a Aesthetic Center. I was fine with the P&L, but there's all these things that I had to learn. And I have learned them. Now I'm in them every day, every single day. I'm in the financials. But yeah, it's been a big, just growing experience for me. It's been the opportunity of a lifetime, and I want to make the most of it. I wake up every morning like I'm going to do everything with this opportunity that God's given me, because I think that right now Alpha's in a season where in 40 years we're going to look back on 2024 and 2025 and say those were the 2 years that just everything changed for our entire company, for every single person. And I look at the opportunities that so many people at Aesthetic Center had, that now they're VPs and they're directors over entire regions, that they just fast forwarded 10 or 20 years in their career. Yeah. And those are the things that get me excited.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think that's really cool. And I think we did a podcast with Melissa Rogny, who sold to Chapter Aesthetics, and she's very much the same, which is Aspen Group, as you mentioned, Aspen Dental, very much the same. And I think you guys would get along well, because it's the same thing, like no MBA background, but it really becomes this thing where the folks that are part of your team, if they want to be part of something bigger, they can really advance and go places that they never thought they would, which is really, really cool. The one thing I have to ask though is, so you mentioned building your original brand was done through, a lot of the kind of family feelings, positive attitude, great place to work. You bring all that together and the revenue follows, and it did. Now you've been kind of dumped into this, swamp, for lack of a better word, but that's not really how I feel about it. But like, you've got this area where all of a sudden you've got to know all these things. You're looking at cash flow reports every day. Has that changed the way that you're trying to run things, or how do you reconcile that with your former self when you were, trying to do this for kind of for the family, really, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I think that I was a fine leader at Aesthetic Center, but the CEO that I am today is 20x what I was at EC. And I would just encourage every leader of every business. I mean, know your numbers, know your business, right? And so spending time just honestly studying your P&L. So many people on my team have like a photographic memory. I don't. I don't. And so I make flashcards. It's like, hey, what was the Williams Center profit margin in August? What was the Aesthetic Center profit margin? What was our anti-aesthetic medicine profit margin? It's like I'm having to like do flashcards over and over just to remember these things. But yeah, know your numbers, know your business, know your operational KPIs, right? What's your rebooking percentage? What should it be? Well, ideally it'd be 55% or more as a start. What's your revenue per hour by provider? What's your revenue per hour by clinic? One of my favorite things to do. So the first thing I do when I look at our P&Ls, and right now we're running 9 different P&Ls plus our consolidated P&L. So trying to review a lot of P&Ls every month. And the first thing I do is I look at net profit on the 4-wall basis. How much do they put on the bottom? But then the next thing I do is every single P&L that we run, I like to compare gross to net profit, right? And gross profit is how much money was left over after I paid my providers and paid for the products to render the service, right? And then obviously net profit's everything in between. So if I can categorize in my mind every single P&L, who has the highest gross profit, who has the lowest gross profit, who has the highest net profit, who has the lowest net profit, which is not a revelation, right? That's obvious. But then this is where it really gets fun for me, is who has the biggest drop from gross profit to net profit. And that's honestly how I think about every single partner's P&L that we have, is where's the efficiency, where's the inefficiency, right? Some of our partners have a really high gross profit, but sometimes they'll have a little bit lower net profit. So I know that the middle of the P&L is the opportunity, right? Their provider COGS, their direct COGS, they're doing great there. But the middle of the P&L, some money is leaking out of the bucket somewhere, right? In the middle. Now we just got to figure out where that is. Not that we're going to slash and dash or churn and burn, but at least we should understand it so that we can optimize around efficiency. Others, we have some partners that have kind of a lower gross profit, but an insanely high net profit, right? So they're really, really, really efficient practices in the middle of the P&L. And that's how I just like to, if I can wrap my head around that with every single partner, every single month, honestly, that right there gives me a really good understanding of what we're doing at a partner by partner level.
But how do you keep the kind of the positive vibes going? Because I think to me, it goes without saying that a lot of successful businesses are going to be ones that people want to work at, that there is camaraderie. It's a team. Everyone's working towards a goal. People like it. Have you found it difficult to kind of keep that intact in light of everything going on around you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I told you I'd be an open book, so I'm really happy to answer that. So doing what I do and doing what you do and doing what a lot of us do. I've said this before on stage, by the way. I'm like, somebody asked, I was on a private equity panel. The Skytail guys were on there with me, Ted, and then some other brokers from Tusk, Josh from Tusk, some lawyers, things like that. Somebody from the panel asked, do you guys get along? I was like, yes, because what we do is really hard. So we kind of we bond. And that was offensive to her. She's like, well, what we do is easy, so screw you. I'm like, dang, I didn't mean that. But multiple things can be true at once, right? Like being a CEO of a PE-backed platform is objectively difficult. There's a lot of time spent on the road. There's a lot of I don't get to see my family as much as I would like, right? Reporting into a private equity board, I had never reported into a board before. And so that's a new experience. And just the demands on all the things that go into being a CEO, like even the time constraints when I am home, right? It's all work from 7:30 to 5. I'll go hang out with my wife and daughters for a few hours, put my girls to bed. Then I'm back in my emails and Slacks and working for a couple more hours, and that's just kind of the demands of it. But I will tell you that I'm a big college football fan. And this is where I would say it gets more fun, is I draw a lot of parallels between a college football coach and being the CEO of a large company, a growing business. So I have my COO, Gary. He's kind of like my offensive coordinator. He runs the offense. I have my CFO, Henry. He's my defensive coordinator. He's running the defense. I'm a huge Notre Dame football fan. The only sports team I really follow. So Marcus Freeman, our head coach, I mean, he's not calling the plays. He's not in the mix all the time with the defense. I mean, his real job similar to a CEO, is building culture, helping with recruiting where it's needed, being the face of the program, and just really working with all the constituents. And I draw a lot of parallels there. So what makes it fun is I'm not directly involved in a lot of the day-to-day drama. As CEO, I'm not way down in the weeds. I know everything that's happening in the business, but my team's working on that. My job is I get to be the figurehead. I get to set the tone with culture. I get to know as much as humanly possible about the business. I get to lead my leaders, our executives. But it's pretty dang fun, man, given all the stress.
That's cool. It's cool and it's refreshing to see because, I think people get worried when they start hearing about private equity buying stuff. It makes some people nervous. It's just kind of the nature of the game. So it's really cool and refreshing to see, to see people who are truly enjoying it and have capitalized on it. The one question I have is, looking back on it, like what's either the one piece of advice you would give folks who are looking at getting acquired, or what's the one question they should ask if they're looking at getting acquired? And has that changed since you've moved from the acquiree to the acquirer?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sorry, I've said that a lot of times. You've asked a lot of great questions.
I mean, it's all part of the script, right?
So the biggest, let me kind of twist the question a little bit. The biggest mistake that I see people make is they undervalue the value of the equity in the platform. So when you think about private equity, there's 6,000 private equity firms in the US. There's a lot of different strategies, a lot of different cultures that they have. But there's also a variance in performance, right? But when you think about the top quartile of private equity firms, I mean, we're talking about the Michael Jordan, the LeBron James of finance. Like these people are as good as it gets with investing, especially where we live, the lower middle market, right? That's kind of where our industry's at right now. These early stage investments, these are professional billion-dollar business builders. And they get a lot of money from investors to do that. And so I'll talk with people sometimes where it's like, hey, I only care about the payday today. I don't care about the value of the equity. I'm not really concerned about what's going to happen 3, 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And that right there, I mean, you can have a large payout today. But I would also encourage you to think about it as an investor, that if you took your practice aside, right? Like let's take the running of the business out of the equation for a second. And let's just say that you had a check for, I'll just use a random number here that's lower than what most acquisitions would be. You had a check for $5,000 or $10,000, right?
Yep.
That you could put into Class A shares in any platform that's backed by any private equity backer. Where would you put that money? Where do you think I could put this money and in 5, 10, 15 years, it would create the most amount of value? And I think when you approach it like that, you're going to find a really good partner who has a really strong track record of returns. You're probably going to maybe not choose the absolute highest offer because a lot of times the highest offer might have almost no returns years down the road, but you're going to choose a good offer that's going to help you create generational wealth for you and your family. So that would be the biggest piece of advice that I would give. The second would be, again, just knowing what's the track record of the management team. Do I like them? I mean, these are people you're going to be working with all the time. What's their strategy around integration? Who is the regional ops director that I'd be working the most closely with? Because your leadership team at the clinical level, that's who they're going to be reporting into. So do they like that person or that team? Are there opportunities for my employees to advance? Are there opportunities for ownership? I also think the place I see a lot of platforms play games is in the structuring of the equity. So some like Alpha, every share is a Class A share. Others, that's the same, right? Others, though, it's like you get some A shares, some B shares, some C shares, and sometimes there's some funky games that can be played. I would just really look into that. So yeah, I mean, those are all the things I'd be asking. What's the culture like? Are the partners happy? can I unsolicitedly just go on the website and call some partners and see if they're happy? I mean, these are all things that I would be asking.
Yeah, and is that, I mean, right back at you, is when you're doing these, when you're looking at companies, are they allowed to go on the website and call Thiersch or Sheila Barberina and say, hey, what's going on with this? They're on there, so it seems like you'd be able to do it.
Yeah, that's why we do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're not giving, you mentioned Sheila Barberina and Thiersch. We don't have their cell phone on the website, but yeah, it's 100% publicly available. Anybody can call any of our partners. We're probably the most open company that I've ever seen when it comes to who our partners are, where the locations are, and you can call any of them, ask them their experience.
Awesome. So what's next? I mean, what's kind of putting the question to you? You're taking your own money, you're investing it in this group, looking for return on your investment. What does that look like? How big is that going to be? Is that every state, 50 brands, 100 brands? What does that look like in your mind?
Yeah, I think that right now we're trying to be, and every platform right now is trying to be capital efficient with high interest rates. Now, it was nice to see a rate cut the other day, but just continuing to be opportunistic, continuing to be efficient. And, for us, the market right now is very hot. So I go to a lot of different events throughout private equity events, throughout, even other healthcare specialties. And I think that for us, we want to just continue to grow, continue to integrate well, and to create happy partners, and that the right time will present itself. And again, I think that what we're doing in aesthetics, there's an incredible demand for it. So I'm very bullish on the direction of Alpha. I also I think we've created a nice brand for ourselves with just a badass brand that we like to have fun and we like to do cool stuff and be inspiring. We also have a podcast network. So that's another thing that, we're going after, is we're trying to build just a network of networks where we have our partnership network, we have our podcast network, we have Operation Med Spa, we have my podcast, the Great Friends podcast. We have 5 or 6 different podcasts. And so, yeah, that's kind of where we're headed, man.
And it would be cool. You mentioned, getting all of your partners together and you have kind of like you're all going to Nashville. That would be cool, because that would be a fun way to, not only do you get to interact with other owners who are in your spot, but you get to do it kind of with the total free flow of information where you're all part of the same thing. And that's got to be a pretty rewarding experience and cool to see people go through that. Do you do that every year, or is this the first time?
This is our first time. We didn't do it last year. So this is our maiden voyage. That really is. So let me then kind of summarize then that thought, because we've kind of talked about some reasons to do it, right? Some reasons not to do it, as far as why somebody would want to join a platform. And yeah, that's a big part of it, is connecting, having partners throughout the US where there's no pretense. We all own a part of each other's business. We can connect and just honestly exchange ideas without like, oh, you're my competition, or I'm going to give you stuff I did 2 years ago, but not that I'm doing right now. So that's a huge reason. Obviously, the initial transaction and the equity is a huge reason. Building something inspiring that has a national scale is a huge reason. Another thing that I think is cool about M&A is, how hard is it? Like, people tell me all the time, I want to build the next laser away. Alex, how many times have people told you about that? I want to build the next laser away.
I mean, not as much recently, but back in the day, that's what it was. Like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that's what it was. It was all, every state, every state, every location.
And so that's to me, when I was in 6th grade, I wanted to play in the NBA. I really thought I was going to play in the NBA. And, a lot of med spa owners have this dream of, I'm going to build a 200 location med spa. That's super hard.
It's almost impossible.
It's almost impossible. Statistically, it is almost impossible. Yep. But what are the chances that with a really good private equity backer, we can create a network of providers, a network of med spas all around the US that we'll add a few locations, you add a few locations, she adds a few locations, and that together we can build something way bigger than any of these big box brands? What's the likelihood of that? Well, I would argue it's pretty damn good. And so that's what's that?
better. It's a lot higher than it was.
It's a lot higher.
For sure.
And I mean, you see both sides of this thing, right? So I'd be curious to hear, and I know we don't have all the time in the world, but I'd be curious. I mean, what is this conversation sparking for you?
Well, I think, again, I mentioned this earlier, and I do find, and I felt this way when I mentioned her before, and I spoke with Melissa Rogney, who sold to Aspen Group. It really is, it's nice to hear the successful stories, right? Because I have heard, I've fielded some calls and talked to some folks who haven't had the best experience, and where there's been some choppiness after a couple of years of being owned by private equity, and so it makes it kind of worthwhile that I think, we've been pushing this, not telling people to do it or not to do it, but just we're reporting on it because it's part of the industry, and so it's, I think it tends to get a bad name, and I think it's that's not always fair. I think there's always a lot of good experiences, and so it's really nice to hear that. I think the other thing that gives me comfort is one of the things that I've been worried about, and others have, I think, as well, justifiably so on some level, is what is all this consolidation, kind of big corporate money, investor money coming in. What is that going to do to the industry, to the way the industry looks and feels, to the way that, to the safety, to all of those things. And it's comforting when someone like you, who has been an owner, you've been there, you've been to a boot camp, right? Which is awesome. You've seen a lot of those things. Having someone like you who is running one of these platforms and is talking to the folks who are being acquired gives me a lot more confidence that this is all going to work out in the end. We're not going to end up, having going sideways for compliance reasons or something else. Does that make sense?
100%. And I think, to your point, and this better than just about anybody in the world, there's not a lot of federal standards when it comes to what we can do in aesthetics. And so I actually believe that private equity-backed consolidation is going to result in better standardization, less of this Wild West atmosphere that we have right now and that we've had since the dawn of our space. The other thing too that I love, and I touched on this earlier, I believe that, and I know this might be myopic, so I apologize in advance, but I do believe that mergers and acquisitions platforms are the hope of the industry. And what I mean by that is, if we're the solution to big box takeover, and if mergers and acquisitions, private equity backed platforms didn't exist, like I said, all of the, local business med spas at some point would no longer be able to compete with the economies of scale that these big box brands have, with the way that they can recruit away their providers. And you would see them go the way of, like I said, Main Street, when Walmart came in and ate everybody's lunch. And so in a lot of ways, M&A platforms provide the just the counterweight to this big box thing. I kind of think about us, this is again myopic, but I kind of think about us as Luke Skywalker handing out lightsabers, because again, we're giving people the ability to fight the empire, to create our own empire together. That's a lot more decentralized. That is a lot more, just to be honest, autonomous and run and gun.
That's a great way to look at it. It's funny. I was just thinking, when we are bumping up on time, but I was just thinking, you're having this conversation with me. We're talking about this. Did you have any idea this is where you'd be, 5-6 years ago? I mean, is it just because I was thinking the same thing for myself? I certainly didn't think 10 years ago when I started, 12 years ago when I started at AmSpa, was never did I dream this is where it would be. It's got to be kind of funny to look back on that. And what does your dad think? I guess the same thing, because he's probably tickled to death.
Yeah. It's been a really special journey with my father-in-law. Him and I created Alpha, the original co-founders, together. So he's proud of what we've done. He's excited about what we're doing. I never thought in a million years I would be doing this. In a million years. Well, that's why I think it just makes it so sweet, is because this wasn't the plan. And I'll get pastoral for a second, if that's okay.
It is.
But in the Bible, you see that a lot, right? Where God doesn't call the prepared, but he prepares the called. And so I pinch myself every morning I just try to really lean on my faith and, on my family and my friends. And it's just been a fun journey. And I try to keep fun at the center. Like I said, it always has to be fun. And my team, one of my best buddies, Kevin, he's our VP of brand strategy. Him and I created the brand for Aesthetic Center together back in the day. He's like, more and more you talk about fun. And it's like, yeah, because this is hard. What we're doing is hard. We're building an airplane in the air at Alpha, but so is our industry. And that makes it hard because you talk to the people at Allergan, you talk to the people from Galderma. It's like, what are you guys doing about this M&A environment? And they're like, this is new to us too. Laser company, same thing. This is new to everybody. So we're on the bleeding edge. We got to have fun with it. And I never thought I'd be doing this. And maybe that's why it's fun too, because I'm an outsider and I'm not a corporate guy.
Well, and I think, the fact that you didn't necessarily plan on it and you were just kind of going, you were doing what makes you happy. You were building a happy brand for lack of a better term. And, and that tends to lead to good things happening. I've always believed that. It's like, it's, if you're doing things for the right reason, good things will happen. And they tend to happen to those who are doing things for the right reason. And so that's great. I think that's really awesome. Alpha Aesthetic, where can folks find more information about you? If someone's interested in it, perhaps, who do they reach out to say, hey, look at me, I'm here too?
Yeah, check out our website, partnerwithalpha.com. You can also find us, same exact handle on Instagram, on LinkedIn. I have a podcast, like I mentioned, the Great Friends Podcast. We do conversations like this, all things med spa, every week. I also post on LinkedIn just about every single weekday about the medical spa space. Again, this really is home for me, and it's about leadership. It's about med spa building. Those are some of the places people can find us on the etherwebs.
Awesome. All right. John Wheeler, CEO of Alpha. Is it Alpha Aesthetics Partners? That's the formal name, Alpha Aesthetics Partners. Hey, I appreciate it. This was great. A lot of good information. I know someone out there is going to get a ton from this. And so I appreciate you being forthright and open. It's great talking to you.
Heck yeah. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you for watching the Medical Spa Insider podcast. Please make sure to subscribe to our channel for future videos and podcasts. For more information about the American Med Spa Association, please check our description below.